Any thoughts, questions before I say anything? Again, y'all are so quiet afterwards. Like, I don't know what happens.
I like you had the subtitles. I could read it. Here, if I couldn't hear it.
Yep. We'll have those from now on. So,
To be clear, there's no evidence of Simon betraying the Jews, is there?
like right. With the merchant ships, right. This is just how they portrayed his sin. We don't know what his sinful nature was, what he did. We just know he said he was a sinful man, so this is how they're portraying it in their take on it. So, thank you. So I got to tell you, there's a few lines in this episode that are my favorites in the series. And one of them is when Nicodemus is talking to Mary, and he asked, did he know her? And she looks back at him and she replies that I was one way and now I'm completely different. And the thing that happened in between was him. Isn't that our life? I mean, if you think back, I mean, you didn't have to have a wicked past to be possessed by demons, before. We've all had our own little demons in our own lives. But you think back to when you accepted Christ, and most of the time we were one way before we accepted him, and then we were different afterwards. I mean, even if you had never done what is really wrong, you are a different person once he enters your life. Even if you grew up in church, you think back, there's a moment where you kind of started realizing who Christ was, and it changed you. It may not have been all of a sudden, not like with Mary where she had 7 demons, suddenly she was healed. It may have been a progressive thing, but you're different now than you used to be, and it's because of him. And I just love that line. And there's actually t-shirts if you want that you can purchase, but no, I love that line in this. And then
She said she was redeemed.
Yeah, she said she was redeemed. Exactly. The other one is, I love the interaction of how they portray between Nicodemus and his wife. And when she calls him Nico, I just get tickled. That's what I've been calling her in the house. I said, Nico. But I love when they're preparing for, several things, but when he's preparing to go talk to Mary, and basically she compares him to God, and he's like, whoa, no. And then when they're preparing for the Shabbat dinner, and of course she's talking about all the finest things and the golds and all this jazz, and we want to give our best, right? Like if we're serving Christ, we want to be our best. We want to give our best, and that's what she's doing. But then Nicodemus kind of points out, like, has it become more about that than about him? We were in captivity for years, and we were kept from worshiping God. Well, now what's getting in the way of us doing it? That doesn't happen nowadays, does it?
I like how they parallel his Shabbat and Mary's Shabbat. It was the same thing. He had the finery and the gold and the silk and whatever, and she had the friends and the words.
And
Jesus.
And Jesus, that's exactly right. Yeah, Jesus. And when the other Pharisee comes in and looks at his wife and says, "Get close to the head of the table."
Yeah.
I mean, is that not a Pharisee attitude? I mean, like, that whole thing cracks me up. But when that Pharisee looks at Nicodemus and says, "You make us whole," and Nicodemus replies, "Only God can do that." Again, we're guilty of it nowadays, right? Putting people or things before Christ. I mean, that's what they were doing. They were putting Nicodemus on such a pedestal that they looked at him as if he were God. And he's like, no. And I don't know if you caught it. There's different things I've caught each time I've seen it, but when he does that, only God can do that, his wife rolls her eyes. It's like, would you shut up already? But you know, she likes her life, and she doesn't want anything interfered with that. So.
And Matthew was having Shabbat with the dog.
Yep. So, any ideas? The house he went and looked in the window. Any ideas?
That was probably his family.
His family, his parents' house. Yep. So, I'm guessing after his talk with his protector, gonna try going home, and it didn't work out.
Yeah.
So, again, that's a portrayal. We don't know what his relationship was like with his father, but chances are he didn't have one. Because if he had become a tax collector, we know how much the Jews hated him, hated the tax collectors. It would have been a problem in a family relationship because his parents would have felt the same way. His father would have felt the same way. Probably betrayed even that he would do that to his own people. So
It made you wonder how Matthew gets along with Simon and the rest of them later on after he's kind of turned him into the Romans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, to go before, it cracks me up how they portray Matthew as he has like Asperger's or something like that. Again, that's their take on it. There's nothing biblically that says that he was that way, but to paint him as socially awkward and, if he's very smart, really good with numbers, he was very advanced. Last week they were talked about how he skipped ahead in school and this kind of stuff. And so I think that's kind of where how they're portraying him to show that he was very intelligent and kind of ahead of the others. And in the extras where it has the three I talked about, the Catholic priest, the Jewish rabbi, and the evangelical, his people he sends the scripts to, when they were talking about this episode, he asked the Catholic priest about it, and Saint Matthew, what is he the saint of? And Saint Matthew in the Catholic Church is the saint of tax collectors and accountants. So if you're a tax collector or accountant, you have a saint, just so you know, this will count for you. If you're a Catholic, I guess. Maybe not if you're not Catholic, so you're out. But again, just kind of, pulling that together. So the relationship with his family probably would have been strained as they're portraying because of what he was and how he was doing it. And who knows, maybe he did try to go home, but it paints again that picture of the strained relationship. So, what else? How about the comments about Nazareth?
Kind of like.
Yes. Yeah. Tess, were you paying attention in church this morning?
I know. I thought about it at the time. Nobody laughed this morning.
That's in the Bible too.
Mm-hmm. Nazareth was looked down upon. It was thought lowly of. It was just, a small little common place that had nothing going for it. It was not anything to be thought about. It wasn't on the map. And it was one of the lowliest places on earth, they considered it. So, yeah. Boy, didn't they get a shock. But, so anytime anybody said that he was from Nazareth, they laughed about it, or they looked down upon it, or, the line, how can anything good come from Nazareth? So, I like how they portray it. It's not just Nathaniel saying it, they used it here as well, so. Anything else y'all saw?
We read about Jesus going and having supper or whatever with people, but when you actually see it, gosh, it's kind of special to see him knock at the door and come sit at your table.
Yeah.
I thought it was neat that he took the empty seat they were saving for Elijah.
Were they sitting in chairs or on pillows there?
On the floor, yeah.
On the floor.
Yeah, they were on the floor in some capacity or another. Again, it's quick. You don't necessarily catch it, but when she goes to sit back down, you see her pull her knees up under her as she goes down. So
she ought to ask him to come in earlier.
She should have asked him to come in earlier. You're exactly. I saw you over there going.
Come on. Yeah, come on.
I think he was just so surprised to see him standing there.
We'd all done the same thing. Like if Jesus, we knew it was him. We always have him at our door, but that's another story. To physically, if he walked up to our door, we'd all been the same way, like,
Amy would say, go hide the dog. Get him off the couch.
I look in the extras when they talk about it. This is one of the things that the writer ran by. Well, he runs everything by, but this is one of the things that they really discussed, those that he sends the scripts to. And it was about Mary leading the Shabbat with Jesus being there. And he asked them, he says, it was her home, Jesus came into it, would she have still led Shabbat, or would it have fallen on Jesus? And they said it would have fallen to the rabbi. Whoever the rabbi was, it doesn't matter whose house it was, the rabbi would have led Shabbat. So like when he came in, her asking him to take it over, that was protocol kind of thing. But that the way they wrote this and the reason they did it this way was to go ahead and start reminding everyone that Jesus viewed women differently. Like when the woman was caught in adultery, he squatted down. He accepted her. He didn't turn her away, he didn't mistreat her. And so it's a way for them to start bringing that in to show that he views women different than the normal, and that he allowed her to go ahead and lead Shabbat and have that authority in her own home. So a little nod to who Jesus is. Anything else? I've got something I want to read to you again from the study guide. It's called Wellspring of Rest. The Jews of first century Israel weren't much better off than their wilderness wandering ancestors. They were living in their own country, but under oppressive Roman occupation and rule. Their continued observance of the Sabbath served as a reminder that God had always been faithful to provide for the needs of his chosen people, but they still longed for relief from their circumstances. Yet according to Isaiah 43:2, relief and rest doesn't necessarily come from circumstances being removed. Rather, they come from God's presence, no matter the circumstance. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. Mary Magdalene experienced Jesus' rescuing power in her life, but being freed from her demons didn't automatically remove her difficult circumstances. No doubt she still had painful memories, relationships that were strained or broken, and consequences that came from life gone awry. But also, she had Jesus. No wonder she ended up becoming one of his beloved, devoted followers, exchanging the roof over her head for a tent, and familiarity for a whole new kind of wilderness wandering. She had found the kind of rest that only comes from communing with the Creator, and she wasn't about to lose his presence. Nicodemus had built a decent life for himself, but while good behavior, success, and money have the power to make life easier, they don't satisfy the soul. Neither does a work-based religion. Adherence to the Sabbath as God commanded was a good thing, but only if it resulted in gratefulness for and worship of the Creator. While Nicodemus's Shabbat gatherings would have been the most ritually respectful, no doubt there was significant emphasis placed on proper observance of Old Testament law. Rituals have the potential to distract from proper observance of God's presence. Matthew had found a way to benefit from the Roman occupation, and as a result, he likely wasn't invited to many Shabbat dinners. Relational fallout would have been unavoidable, though perhaps for a time he was able to ignore the loneliness that came with the taxman territory. The striving after personal gain leads us away from our Creator, away from any hope we have of experiencing true rest and peace. Simon might have been among those most ready for God to intervene in Israel's difficult circumstances. Overwhelmed by financial hardship, he likely struggled with impatience, maybe even his faith. Perhaps he wondered when God would relieve Israel's suffering and restore their freedom. Perhaps he wondered if God still cared about his chosen people at all. Wonderings that would have made Shabbat remembrances painful and confusing. In any case, Mary is again the example we should aspire to follow. She wasn't striving to obey a commandment in order to earn God's favor. She knew she'd already received his gracious and unmerited favor. Instead, she was eager to set aside time to remember her Creator, the one who knew her by name, to enter into his presence and celebrate what he'd done and what he would do. Compared to Nicodemus's Shabbat dinner, Mary's was humble and imperfect, but far more glorious. And it didn't hurt that Jesus was in the room. Anything else? All right, I have homework for you again. I know you're excited. You don't have to turn it back in, it's not for a grade. For the new guys.
Good.
No. I got that question last week. It's just for you to take home for further study, to help deepen and look more into the scriptures along with this. So, anything else? I forgot to have us pray before we started. Y'all should have reminded me. I shouldn't have forgotten, but y'all should have reminded me. So, anyone want to pray us out?
Lord, we thank you for today. We thank you for an opportunity to gather in your house and to see your story presented to us. Help us to open our hearts to Jesus when he calls. That's the key. We thank you for blessing us, but help us, as Sydney prayed earlier today, that our blessings be turned back to you. Thank you for looking after us. Thank you for all you do for us, and thank you for all of our blessings. Help us to keep our eyes on you. Father, thank you for this time. Bless us as we go our separate ways and keep us all safe. Bring us back at our next appointed meeting time. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank y'all.